Okay, I start. Good morning or good afternoon, sorry, dear colleagues. Firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Rostislav Kuzmichenko, as was said by Bassem, and I live and work in Ukraine. There's a location of my dental laboratory, and at the same time, I'm an opinion leader of Dentsply Sirona in Ukraine and CIS countries. That's the way my city, the capital of Ukraine, looks nowadays when we celebrated the New Year. And at the time of my master classes and lectures, schemes of layering, schemes of stratification, or schemes of applying of stains, that's the part that attract the biggest attention of the audience. But I always say to dental technicians who are visiting my master classes, please, it's not enough only fix these schemes. Please try to understand their logic. This way, you will be able to become the author of the schemes yourselves. And the other important thing is to observe the natural teeth, to find some elements that combine their visual appearance and try to equal components in our ceramic systems, to try to mimic them, try to imitate them. When we have such an artistical approach, we look like an artist. We copy nature like an artist. And this is a very exciting thing, a very exciting work, because nowadays we have three very important instruments that are very useful and very effective to create the aesthetics of our restoration, and all of them are very important. This is the all ceramic framework material. This is veneer and porcelain for individualization of our restoration, and of course these are our stains that are especially developed to apply on our restoration. And I will take as a basis work with pressable porcelain material, but I would like to advertise any system. Please, I would like to use this technology as a basis. You can use the similar principles if you work with other framework materials, with other all ceramic press wall materials, zirconia, or other kind of milled materials, lithium disilicate, for example, or feldspar. And please, firstly, take a closer look at this pressed object, at this pressed restoration. We can see that it is opalescent, and this is very, very translucent. So it's very important to pay attention to the shade of our prepared tooth, and there are different ways to do that. Of course, everyone knows the classic way to mimic the shade of prepared teeth. This is the resin cement that is offered by every manufacturer. And we can use this material first of all, but this material can be individualized with composite stains, and please pay attention to this way too. And the other way to imitate the shade of prepared tooth is the line of natural dye spacers. We have selection of different dye spacers, and we can apply it on the dye, and this way this dye will imitate the appropriate shade of the prepared tooth. And we can use, for example, the silver or gold dye spacer to imitate the metal post of the appropriate material. We can make a Geller model, and after that duplicate our dye with silicone and make the copy out of acrylic with the proper shade. This copy can be individualized with composite paints too. But my favorite way to individualize my dies to mimic the shade of prepared patient's teeth is the dentin wax. And these dentin wax can be modified with crayons. This is a very cheap and very effective way. A very, very good technician from Peru, Edwin Zanabria, told me about this system, and this is his present for me, this beautiful and nice llama. Please have a look. I can compare the shade of effect, and I can find the grain of the proper shade that is practically equal to this shade. At the same time, I can melt together different crayons, for example, red, yellow, and gray, and to add in the same in different ways to my dentin wax, and this way I get the dye of the proper shade. And I like this technique because I have an unlimited opportunity to modify every segment of the prepared tooth. For example, to mimic metal post, or to mimic the enamel area, or to mimic some chromaticity or some discoloration. And after that, at the time of making of the restoration, I can take into account all these things. And this way, I avoid the opportunity of aesthetic damaging of my restoration. And I can use tooth picks the wooden handle, or I can make this wax dye to the impression. There are two ways, by the way, of this technology. The first way, to put the melted wax directly to the impression and form the dye this way. The other way is to put the melted wax to the crown, to the directly. After that, to remove it from the crown and fix in the impression. And after that, to make the model of this kind. And in this situation, in this case, I used white wax to fix the wax dye, but I can use pink wax as well, and this would be even more better picture of the, because this way I can take into account influence of the soft gum tissues of the patient that influence the final shade of the restoration. And of course, when I check, when I control the shade of my restoration at the time of staining, or at the time of at any step of the technology, I put some drying gel, transparent as a rule, drying gel on the surface of the dye, mimicking the shade of the prepared tooth. This way I can avoid presence of the air between my dye and between my restoration, and that is a true impression, true expression of the shade in general. And I would like to start my lecture about individualization of all ceramic restorations from staining technique. Due to development of framework materials and due to development of CAD/CAM systems, that technique has become the favorite one for the majority of dental technicians. And the modern framework, all ceramic framework materials, they not only have the warm color, they are opalescent too, like Celtra Press or Celtra Duo. But we must take into account the kind of glaze when we customize the monolithic restoration. As a rule, every manufacturer provides us with two kinds of glazes. There are regular glaze or high flue one. I know two glazes provides us such a manufacturer as Ivoclar. And what is the difference? Please have a look at this charming young lady, and she had a charming smile until she went to the disco. And it turned out that her monolithic restorations made from zirconia, maybe lithium disilicate, they were glazed with not a proper glaze. So that glaze wasn't fluorescent, and that's the result of this wrong choice of the dental technician. They looked quite nice at the daylight or at some artificial light, but in the light of the discos, they reveal this lack of fluorescency. When we cover our restoration with veneering porcelain, as a rule, it is fluorescent itself. But when we finish our restoration and using stain and glaze technique, we have taken into account that our materials for glazing and staining must be fluorescent. And have a look at the next picture, the way the fluorescence of the monolithic restoration changes when we apply high flu glaze. At the same time, please look at the bridge on the right picture when it's veneered with veneering porcelain material, so we don't have such a problem. As a rule, material framework, all ceramic framework materials such as zirconia, lithium disilicate, or a new generation silicates reinforced with zirconia, they are not fluorescent enough. So, but we don't have such a problem when we used framework materials that contains a feldspar as a basis. But this kind of materials has a very serious disadvantage. It is not as strong as zirconia and lithium disilicate. And I would like, my dear colleagues, you to find in my lecture some tips and tricks that will be useful at the time of your everyday's work. So I collected some tips and tricks I use every day. And firstly, I would like to start with some advices about using of stains. As a rule, every system of stains includes shade stains. In Dentsply Sirona system, they have a name as body stains. And the first advice, we can influence the translucency of our monolithic restorations. Sometimes this translucency is too sufficient, and we can see that our stamp is visible. It's obvious if we look at the left picture. But if we mix the proper stain, body stain with white, we can increase opacity of this mixture, and we can apply it on the surface of our monolithic restoration and mask this segment to avoid lightening effect of the stamp. Every system of stains include incisal stains, and our monolithic restoration can be customized in enamel areas with help of these stains, or have shades like purple, violet, blue, and gray to emphasize enamel edge, for example. But I'd like you to pay attention to the next two components, red and blue, because when we mix them together we can get the complicated violet shade. And this shade is the ideal solution when we have a plan to create the illusion of translucency, to illusion of transparency of our monolithic restoration. When this mixture is applied on the surface of the monolithic restoration, we can change the light we can increase the absorbing of the light, and visually this segment will look more translucent, more or even more transparent. The other three important components are red, yellow, and blue. And when we mix them together, we can get the complicated gray. This is the classic mixture, and a lot of authors written their books about this mixture. With help of complicated gray, we can reduce the value of our restoration without affecting its hue and chroma. And red stains, they're necessary if you want to achieve the good in vivo blending. Look at the cervical aspect of natural tooth. We can find in this segment the presence of chromatic orange shade due to a thin layer of enamel of natural tooth, and at the same time there's influence of gingiva surrounding our restoration. So we can put our red stain and to achieve good in vivo blending, good integration with our soft tissues, or we can put only orange stain and to achieve more sufficient chromaticity. But if we mix these two components together, we will get the universal component, and the crown will look much better if we apply this mixture on the cervical aspect. And in general, there's a wide selection of stains in every stain system, and every dental technician has a choice what way to choose, because every effect of the natural tooth can be created both with effect porcelain material or with a proper stain. And very important bright stains like white, cream, and cream. Of course, this is a necessary component to emphasize cusp tips or mamelons. Our restoration will be more aesthetic when we use these stains. At the same time, we can emphasize ridges and cingulum on the labial or palatal side of front teeth, or we can paint cracks if there's such a necessity, or create other kind of contrasts. And now I'd like to say a couple of words about halo effect. We can use cream as universal stain to create it at the time of staining. And I use this stain and this technique even when I work with porcelain, and to create my enamel area in 3D with help of porcelain material. And after crown is finishing, technically it's not a problem to create the halo effect with help of this stain. But please, dear colleagues, pay attention that this halo effect is equal in its shade to the shade of dentin that we can find in the enamel third. So we can mix white with proper shade stain and to achieve the right color of our halo effect, and this way the aesthetic of our crown will be increased. As I said previously, the new generation of all ceramic framework provides us with an excellent aesthetics, and we can achieve the shade matching when we use, for example, Celta press. If we make monolithic restoration from the proper ingot that is selected according to the appropriate shade chosen from the shade guide. This crown can be slightly customized with enamel stain. We can customize enamel area, enamel thought, and we can add some color on the occlusal surface on the crucial surface in forces, and we can emphasize cusp tips with help of cream, and this way to increase the aesthetic of our crown. And the similar technique can be applied when we customize with help of stencil glaze front tip, for example, crown on the single central. Again, palette MTA1 for the shade A1. We only customize the enamel area. After that, add some cream to create the more visible mamelons, and I put some cream on the enamel edge to create the halo effect. And we can use complicated violet mixing blue and raspberry and to put it in the space between mamelon or on the corner of our restoration. But please take a closer look at the shade guide. One of this picture is a regular one of them is with extremely increased saturation, and the third one is with extremely reduced one. So we can see the picture of our shade guide in black and white, and we can see obvious distribution of brightness. The segment near the enamel area is brighter, and the segment closer to the cervical aspect is darker. And if we made the picture of our restoration press from palette A1 for shade A1, we can see the difference. We don't have such a distribution of brightness. We don't have such situation when we use multi-layer zirconia or press ingots multi. But if we use regular ingots, it's a very effective way to select the brighter, lighter ingot, for example, A1 for shade A2. And after that, we customize it like in previous way with help of shade stain. We can add some orange on the cervical aspect. We can emphasize enamel area and to create an illusion of pearlescence when we add some blue near the edge of our enamel area, and of course emphasize cusp tips with bright stain like cream. And this way the result will be natural looking. Of course, I forgot to mention we can add some brown stain if the patient and the dentist don't mind, because I personally like color forces with brown stain, but not all my customers like this approach. And if we increase the saturation of our picture, we can see more natural distribution of brightness. So this is a very effective technique when we finalize our monolithic restoration. We can see the distribution of brightness from the buccal aspect. And the same technique can be used when we finalize the single central, for example. So again, the brighter ingot was used, A1 for shade A2, and we can see that the stamp is visible. So the first task is mask this area. And as I said previously, the proper shade stain can be mixed with white color, and this way the opacity of this mixture is increased, and it can work like opacious dentin at the time of layering technique and to mask this area. And after previous firing, we continue our technique with applying of body stain, with applying of orange body stain to emphasize the cervical the cervical aspect. After that, we continue customize our enamel area with regular enamel stain and emphasize mamelon and halo with cream. And after that, we can emphasize enamel edge to make illusion of transparency with help of my favorite mixture of red and blue. In our system, they have names as blue and raspberry. But my dear colleagues, please take a closer look at natural teeth. By the way, this is a picture of the teeth of my son, his age of 15. And again, we can see distribution of brightness. And please have a look on the cervical margin. They are orange and red at the same time, quite a special shade. Please look at the transparency on the enamel edge, and this transparency is hidden inside. So there is such as in transparent chamfer. And after that, this transparency is colored with less transparent enamel layer of the enamel. This is a natural distribution of enamels. And of course, we can see a very complicated structure of mamelons near incisal edge and strong halo effect. And when we increase saturation of our picture or instably reduce it and get this picture in black and white, our observation is confirmed. And we dental technicians use the principles that are used by artists. Please look at this picture. This is a diorama. I have two sons and we often visit museums of nature. That's why I decided to use this example. So please have a look at this diagram. We can see the deer and we can see the grass, and they are 3D, but the background is 2D painted canvas. We can see painted sea, painted mountains, and we dental technicians are like the people who create dioramas. So create the picture canvas and to make our help of painting, or we to prove the reality to provide painting of our framework, and after that to apply a 3D veneer and porcelain on the foreground. Or we can customize our restoration completely with help of build-up technique and to make 3D deers, grass, the sea, the mountains. This full customization will be build-up technique. And let's start with the stain technique. With help of stain, we can achieve the natural effects. The effects I said about those I said previously when I asked to take a closer look at the picture of natural single centrals. And for this technique, we use the brighter ingot. And the first thing that we do is to apply some blue to mimic the transparency of the enamel edge. After that, we create the halo effect with some cream. After that, we keep on applying staining. We apply our body stain, and this way we get the desirable shade and achieve the distribution of brightness. And after that, we add some raspberry on the cervical margin, and this way we increase the level of in vivo blending of our restoration. And the area under mamelon is emphasized with help of red-orange stain. It will provide the contrast, it will provide the natural background for the mamelons that will be created at the time of the next step. And we provide firing to fix that stains and keep on staining with help of cream. This way we emphasize mamelons to make the structure visible, and after that we need to create the reflecting layer. And for creating of this reflecting layer, to avoid too intensive absorption of the light with our monolithic restoration, we can use the mixture of white and proper body stain and apply in the wake like a cloudy spots. And after providing the firing, fixing that applied stain, I keep on with applying of white stain. And I was inspired for using of this technique with an article of Paolo Cana. Once I met it in the magazine Quintessence and tried to use his principles of 3D painting. They're very effective. And I need to finalize my restoration with help of glaze. Because I work with Celtra press, lithium silicate enforced with zirconia, I have to use the high flue glaze. So with help of high flue glaze, I can achieve not only the proper gloss of my restoration. This glaze can be used as a texture paste. So I can apply it in quite a thick manner and to make some details of the surface. And this way, my crown will look more aesthetically. But in terms of aesthetics, it's quite a difficult way to achieve the aesthetic light reflecting surface of the restoration. So I can replace this white thin film of stain with a thin film of white veneering porcelain. When I make the wax of my restoration, I reduced it slightly, 0.1 millimeter. And for pressing, I use ingot MT, A2 for the shade A3, for example, or A3.5. So there must be slightly brighter ingot. And I keep on working with making of the wax dies imitated the shade of the prepared teeth. And after that, I color in the previously manner. Again, I make distribution of value. Again, I apply a body stain to achieve the proper shade of my restoration. Again, I customize the enamel third with help of proper enamel stain and add illusion of translucency with help of blue shade. That's the way my restoration looks after the firing. And I keep on customizing it with help of whitish opalescence enamel, like EO6 from the Celtra Ceram system. And this porcelain material is very convenient for using for this technique because it's not necessary to provide the previous wash firing, and I can apply it with a thin layer on any segment of my restoration. That's very useful from the technical point of view. And I finish customization of my restoration with help of high flue glaze. I can add some stains in occlusal fossa, for example, or to emphasize some elements of this restoration. And please have a look. The single molar was finalized only with help of glaze and stains. And for these 3 units on the upper picture, I use this technique with micro layering of whitish opalescent enamel. And if we make a close, precise look at the fourth of the molar, we can see that there are some areas when we can't see the previous sharpness anymore, because the glaze slightly influenced the level of individualization of this crown. But if we have a look at our restoration that was finished with help of whitish opalescent enamel, we don't have such a problem. It has more high level of the individualization and detalization. And this is one more example of using of this technique. But in terms of aesthetics, imitating of enamel areas with stains is compromise in terms of aesthetics. When dental technicians use this technique, they are like children that paint windows of the houses with help of blue color. That's why we use cut back technique, and I'd like to say a couple of words about the principles that can be used at the time of this technique. The first one is to apply quite a bright enamel that is not very translucent, and with help of this enamel we can achieve the distribution of value of our restoration, and of course we achieve the presence of enamel third, the presence of the segment absorbing the light. And in this case, for shade A2, for example, we used the palette A2, and because we will use the enamel for cutback technique, we can use LT ingot for pricing of this all ceramic frame work. But please have a look what we have if we use light enamel for distribution of value. Our enamel third is not very translucent, and if we want to create a beautiful structure of mamelons, this structure will be masked with the layer of this enamel. So the second way is to choose the lighter ingot for pricing of this framework, and after that to provide the previous staining with help of body stains. This way we can achieve the final color and to provide the distribution of our value. At the same time, there's an opportunity to individualize the enamel area and to emphasize mamelons with some bright stain. When we use this technique, this solution, we can use more translucent enamels to create the enamel area and to apply them with a thinner layer. And the same technique we can use when we make crowns for molars, for example. And I would like to say a couple of words about more complicated technique. Have a look, the shade of the ingot was selected according to the shade of the middle part of the lateral of this bridge. After that, the bluish opalescent enamel effect was applied to create the enamel frame, and for distribution of brightness, the light regular enamel was applied on the lateral and a little bit on the corner of on the ridges of the canine. We kept on working with the power denting. This is a bright This is a rather bright porcelain with increased chromaticity, and this porcelain can imitate the structure of mamelons very effectively. And to increase the reflection of the light in the middle part of the central mixture of bleach and whitish opal enamel was used. After that, I overlap everything with transparent opalescent enamel in the enamel set, and with translucent opalescent material in the middle segment of the restoration. And I can use enamel effect like sunset. This is the orange enamel effect to increase chromaticity of the area of the cervical aspect. And the last technique I would like to say is the full customization with help of veneering porcelain material. I know the dental technicians, my colleagues, less and less like these techniques because no one likes working hard. It's much easier to create the monolithic restoration according to the full shape of the tooth and finalize it with things. But if we need to achieve the best aesthetics, and if we need to customize one single central, for example, or we need to mask the discoloricity of prepared tooth, this technique is still used. For masking of discoloration, we use MO, medium opacity ingots, but this is not the only solution, because bleach ingots can mask the discoloration too, due to the brightness. In this case, we need to create the proper shade of our framework, to correct the shade, to check it with help of shade stain. In our system, its name is body stain. If we want to avoid the concentrated effect, to avoid presence of spots of this stain, we can reduce its concentration with help of high flue glaze, and technically the distribution of this mixture will be more easier task. We can increase the depth of color of our stained frame work with help of transparent enamel. We can sprinkled it on the surface of the stained framework and provide the firing. And if after that our framework doesn't mask discoloration of the prepared tooth, we can increase its opacity with help of opacious dentin that is selected according to the proper shade. And please bear in mind that we can increase illusion of depth when in the area of enamel thread, the brighter opacious dentin mix with gray dentin effect is applied. This way we increase the depth of color of our crown. And classic way to make a build up, to choose the dentin of the proper shade, slightly emphasize transparency of the enamel edge with help of opalescent transparent material, and after that to apply it light enamel that has an reduced translucency to provide the presence of enamel thread and to provide the distribution of value of our restoration. But like working according to the cutback technique, there is one more approach. For example, I used this approach when I made the single crowns. there was different dentin was applied. So in the area of enamel, I applied the lighter dentins, and after that I used more translucent enamel, opalescent enamel. And that crown was rather nice in the patient's mouth. And I'm about to finish my lecture, and I would like to set a couple of words about using of effect masses. Remember to use orange dentin effect. We can emphasize the area under mamelons, or emphasize the lingual or palatal aspect of the front crowns. We can emphasize our mamelons with help of a bright powder that has increased chromaticity, and that effect will be very smooth. We can use the dentin effects such as blue, gray, and violet, and mix them with the transparent material to achieve the special effects of our enamel. And the dentin effects can be used to correct the general shade if we use full customization. For example, group of shades A is reddish brownish, so we can increase the presence of the red shade if we add some pink dentin effect DE5, or we can increase the yellow shade of group B if we add D7, the yellow one. We can use mixture of power dentin, the element of our veneering porcelain with increased chromaticity, with the gingiva dentin, and this mixture is very aesthetic when we apply it on the cervical aspect. And of course, we can emphasize transparent enamel edge with help of transparent materials, and transparent materials with increased opalescence. EO4 is my favorite one, and these porcelains can be used to dilute some effects and to reduce their intensity. And the other component I would like to say, this is enamel effects. So violet enamel effects is very aesthetic way when we need to increase the zone of absorption of our enamel layers, especially when we don't have enough room, or we have, or we can make a mixture of high absorption if we mix this material with opalescent transparent, for example. And bluish opalescent enamel has the similar way when it can be used. In our system, its name is Sky. So we can make enamel frame with help of this bluish opalescent material, or to add it on the whole surface. For example, when we work according to the cat bag technique and we don't have enough room for the depth of our enamel layer. Remember to use white, bright components to emphasize cingulums, marginal ridges, or mamelons, for example. And of course, to emphasize cusp tips. This way our restoration will look more natural. We can imitate the gray areas with help of gray effects, or add them if we don't have enough space for depth of transparency of enamel edge. And of course, white and yellow and orange enamel effects can be used as the cervical enamels to increase chroma of some segments, or to emphasize some colored elements of our enamel. But I'd like to say that both technique, full veneering or staining, can be useful in aesthetics. I would like to thank you, my dear colleagues, for the attention, and I would like to thank Yaman Chaban, the trainer and employee of Densply Sirona, because I used some picture of his in this presentation. I would like to thank Hans-Jürgen Joid, a dental technician from Düsseldorf Dental, because I used a couple of pictures of his. And of course, I would like to thank Dental Labor for this invitation. That was a very exciting thing to take a part of in this excellent event. So thank you again.